The question tonight is Donald Trump, Project 2025, or the Republican Party represent fascist ideals? Now, someone may have noticed my previous video talking about National Socialism and say, well, didn't we already cover this? The fact is, fascism and National Socialism are actually quite different from each other. Different enough that Germany and Italy almost went to war over Austria. And also in Austria, there were fascist parties and National Socialist parties vying for control of the country during their political period. Now, the reason why, everyone knows, well, geez, everyone just knows that both sides are fascist, so why argue it? Like, well, because the use of the term fascist to describe National Socialism is a deliberate attempt to obscure history. Essentially, communists and socialists during World War II found it incredibly awkward that a country practicing National Socialism, which is a form of socialism, went to war against Russia or Soviet Union, which was also practicing their form of socialism. Uh, this created a quandary in terms of how you do the propaganda. So, thus, they chose a foreign word to everyone, fascism, to describe both. Uh, and there is significant enough difference between the two that uh, it warrants to ask the same question for this as we did National Socialism. Well, didn't they end up both on the same side? Uh, by default. Essentially, Italy did not believe it was ready for war. And when Germany seemed to be doing so incredibly well, they believed the war would be over before they could join in and take their share of the spoils. So they jumped in on the German side in order to do that. As the war would go on, Italy would discover it wasn't ready for war, and almost under economic and military collapse was dependent on Germany to get it through. Now, the big difference between fascism, National Socialism, and Marxian socialism is essentially means of implementation. And when you compare the different forms of socialism, which fascism is also a form of socialism, when you get down to really the minutia of the means of implementation, if you're not a socialist, it seems very silly. It's like, well, the differences seem so subtle. Why does it matter? Well, it matters to socialists. And that's why they get to play the that wasn't real socialism game because they each have their own variation of how they think it should be implemented. And if you're not doing it their way, it's not the real way. All right, so let's talk about fascism and compare it to Trump, Project 2025, and the Republican Party. So, uh, first with fascism, the idea was they wanted to create a nationalist state based on historical boundaries and ethnicities are ignored. Now, this is a huge difference between them and the Germans, whereas the Germans had this idea of race, that the Germans or Aryans were a form of race that had all these cascading different groups that fell beneath them were and Jews falling into the lowest tier. The fascists did not believe this at all. Uh, Italy had a sizable Jewish community. Uh, Jews were not only welcome, but made up a large portion of the fascist party itself. Much later on during the war, when Italy became totally dependent on the Germans for everything, they would start capitulating, and they did ultimately send off some of their citizens to the German camps. Uh, but this was not the basis of fascism. This was essentially as Italy was collapsing, it wasn't able to maintain its ideals anymore. And so the historical boundaries that Italy viewed were essentially the areas roughly equating to the old Roman Empire. These would expand some because there were nationalities expanding into areas that the Roman Empire didn't. Like, good example, Algeria. You've got an area where the Romans would have only have occupied the coastal areas, where Algeria goes deep into the upper part of Africa. So therefore, if you take the part of Algeria, you take the whole thing. So how does this compare to our current American entities, Trump 2025 and the Republican Party? Um, there's actually a reasonable comparison here. Whereas in all three cases, okay, well, specifically with the cases of Trump and Project 2025, there is a nationalist element to what they're doing. They want to reorient nationally rather than globally, and this nationalism does not have an ethnic base. Essentially, if you're here and you're a citizen, you get the benefits of being in this state. The Republican Party as a whole does not fit into this because they have a progressive wing that is globalist in nature. And the Republican Party hasn't completed the transformation it's in the middle of. And we don't know where it's going to land in terms of globalism and nationalism. So this is this is one that's actually somewhat legitimate. However, I don't believe there's anybody in any of these groups uh, suggesting or recommending the U.S. take back former territories, such as like the Panama Canal or the Philippines or anything else like that. Right? Another plank of the concept of fascism is the idea of creating a war machine that's capable of conquering and holding the historical areas. One little interesting thing dealing with the historical areas, uh, all the areas that are outside Italy are not considered part of the Italian nation. However, over time, fascists believe they could mold these people into fascist citizens. And so there's a bit of a colonial mindset of this where they believe they had the ability to uplift these people and make them proper fascists that might be uh, maybe second or possibly at some point even first class citizens within the fascist realm. So, another critical part of fascism is autarky. Now, you say, oh, wait a minute. Don't those National Socialists believe in autarky as well? Well, actually, so did the Marxist socialists of Soviet Union. Autarky um, is a function of the idea of the shrinking market theory. The shrinking market theory is deeply socialist. The idea that essentially that as a country industrializes, it'll lose its ability to feed itself and produce raw materials. So therefore, you need to have a central planning in order to have these materials available for you in the center homeland. Uh, to a certain extent, it would also mean uh, taking on colonies or outside lands in order to essentially compel them not to industrialize so that they could permanently remain your farming and raw material areas. And this is something Marx himself talked about when he believed that actually slavery was absolutely necessary for the socialist state to survive. Uh, he believed that North America could not have an economy without slavery. And this doesn't change whether it's capitalist or socialist. He believed the slave class was necessary. Whereas in the autarky of uh, the Soviet Union, Nationalist Socialist Germany, and Fascist Italy, the idea was that you needed as much self sufficiency as you possibly could pull off. And a lot of this meant not trading with people. If you did have trade with people that you had resources you're dependent on. You either try to artificially produce it, like Germany made synthetic oil, or you actually try to uh, either turn the area where the resource is into a puppet or outright conquer it itself. I don't think any of our entities, Trump, Project 2025, or the Republican Party, really fall into our autarky. You could make a small argument in the direction that Trump is trying to make the United States more self sufficient in energy and manufacturing and other things like that. But I don't believe that anything in his rhetoric indicates that he is looking for uh, total production of finished goods, raw materials, and food all in the homeland itself. Okay, another key element of fascism is elimination of all competing political parties. And literally, I don't see anything in any Trump Project 2025 or the Republican Party that indicates that's what they want to do. Certainly, they want to be dominant. Certainly, they want to create an environment that propagates their ideas into the future. But the idea that they're trying to actually destroy the Democrat Party or any of the other third parties seems kind of ludicrous. Now, this is one of those oddball things, and this is where we get into the how do you create fascist socialism? And you're gonna, if you followed what was going on with National Socialism, you say, well, didn't something like this occur there too? And something like this also occurred in uh, the Soviet Union, but it's just a little bit different. The Italians believed in bringing about socialism via syndicalism and the syndicates. And the idea is that they would create boards that were made up of the business owners, the trade unions, and the government. And these boards would exert full control over industry. And in theory, everybody got a say so as long as everyone ultimately eventually agreed with the government. Uh, Whereas in the Soviet Union and National Socialist Germany, the creation of a mass trade union in the end, one nationalized trade union, was a step along the way. The Italians believed that the syndicates were a prerequisite for making things happen. And the idea is, and this is another area where National Socialism and fascism differ. National Socialism believed in essentially conflict between the races, and that in order to bring socialism about, you had to end conflict between the races. Whereas fascism shared the same idea with uh, Soviet socialism, where they believed there was class conflict. And the way the fascists decided to get rid of class conflict was rather than by killing everybody off, like the Russian Soviets, their idea was to create this merger of all the entities in order to essentially make the class go away. Now, this is also the area where a lot of people get confused because they're like, oh, well, that's the part where business and government become one. Well, only if you, not in any way you'd think about it as things that were going on in Western countries. Uh, this is a transition, is not the end goal. This is how they basically get to the point where as eventually the people on this board, the representatives of the trade unions, the business owners, and the government are essentially all one class when it's going to be over. So the business owners won't actually be owning anything anymore. They're just going to be part of one big council of kumbaya where the workers, the people who know how to operate the business end of things, and the government telling them what to do, all form as this, or are all running as this seamless machine. So it's a lot different than how it's being portrayed as somehow being capitalist. Um, Fascist Italy would follow similar suit to National Socialists in Germany, essentially forcing businesses to comply with edicts via the syndicate boards. And if they got to the point where they failed to follow the edicts of the boards, the business would be turned over to party members. Uh, by 1939, 90% of Italian uh, businesses were pretty much under direct government control. Now, when we're talking about this transitional period where you're essentially merging the trade unions, the business leaders, and governments and boards that control the business, uh, I don't think there's anything in Trump rhetoric, the papers of Project 2025, nor GOP platforms from current to beginning that talk about this being a way of doing things. I think the closest comes you will hear some of the Republican Party is in favor of private corporate partnerships, but it isn't a dominant feature of the Republican platform. I have not seen anything in Project 2025 that matches up that idea. And at best, there might be a couple of items Trump has mentioned where private corporate uh, cooperation is a thing. So pretty tenuous there to try to say that might be part of it. All right. Now, fascism went a weird way for several reasons. First, uh, they ended up enshrining Catholicism as the one true state religion. However, if you look at fascist writings, the fascists were almost identical in terms of the National Socialists and the Marxist Socialists in basically saying religion was not a good thing. Uh, just like the Soviets got rid of religion because they had absolute control over everything, so they could start stamping it out. The National Socialists of Germany could never get very far along with it. You know, if they had survived over the long term, they probably would have rooted it out. However, they couldn't afford uh, the destabilization removing religion would cause. So they basically backburnered it. Whereas the Italians, Catholicism was so deeply rooted that there was no way they could even bring it up as a uh, something they were working on. So they pretty much, rather than uh, actively rooted it out, they actively tried to co-opt it by saying, yes, Catholicism is so uh, uh, completely linked with being ethnically Italian or nationalistly Italian that you can't separate the two. Of course, and this gets the Catholic Church a bad name. Now, the picture I got up here is kind of interesting because we have Mussolini, the Pope, and the King. Most people do not realize that the King of Italy never stepped down during the entire run of the fascist rulership. When the fascists, basically what happened is that the fascists came to power by stomping down communist uprising. And pretty much the establishment of Italy went, oh, well, we don't like communists. And these guys gallivanting around in black shirts at least save things for a bit. Let's see what they can actually do. So they essentially agreed that the fascists could step in and take over. However, the king was still the nominal head of the government. In fact, Mussolini was required to report to the king on a weekly basis and perform essentially a state of the nation to him to explain what was going on, etc., etc. And when the fascist government would eventually be abolished, Mussolini was called before the king. the king dismissed him, and their government was over. So, enshrining one religion as a nationalist religion. Uh, I, again, now I know some of you who are more sensitive to religion will go, well, yeah, that's exactly what's happening with Trump, Project 2025, and the Republican Party. Well, Trump, what his religious beliefs are, if you know what they are, then you're doing better than me, because I, for the life of them, can't figure it out. I would say at best, he parrots the religious stuff he hears and understands to enough of a level to basically keep that part of his voter base uh, coming to him. I'm not going to go outright and say I don't think he believes in anything, but I don't think he believes strongly in a lot of the things a lot of his base does. Uh, so I don't see anything in his rhetoric that indicates that he's going to be enshrining religion. At best, I'd say he's going to be giving it at least surface respect in order to keep his base straight. Project 2025 doesn't mention religion at all. Uh, the Republican Party uh, plays around on the fringes of various social items that have a religious nature. But the thing is Christianity is broken up in so many different sects that it's impossible to completely just say, yes, I've imposed Christianity on the nation. Uh, so, I mean, there's some elements there, I'd say, but in all honesty, they're tenuous again. So ultimately, we have Italian fascism, which is also fascist socialism, working by ending class conflict via the syndicate in order to basically smooth things out and bring total socialism. Uh, although I think Trump inadvertently embraces a few socialist concepts here and there, as well as the Republican Party, the idea that they're attempting to create total socialism is absolute nonsense. All right, so I've noticed in the news that the stuff on Project 2025 uh, maybe being rapidly overtaken by events. So hopefully, the rest of this does have some use to you. But uh, yeah, okay. So in the comments below, what do you think? Uh, do you think that I'm missing any elements of fascism? I mean, actual fascism, not what communists and socialists made it out to be after the fact. But is there anything in actual fascism that I'm missing that actually are key elements to Trump's plan or Project 2025 or the Republican Party platform? Comment below. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithms brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, please check out my other titles. I'm sure you'll find something you'll find interesting. Please subscribe. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, share it with them. Well, thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.